You may know that John and Ians wrote a book called Neuroart History, and a couple of years ago, the College Arts Association, which is the national organization for art history, had a panel in which he and I and a couple other people were there. So yes, we've conversed. My read of Neuroart history is that what he does is a kind of what I would call descriptive neuroaesthetics, in the sense that he looks at sort of movements in art history and connects those to various findings in both perceptual psychology and neuroscience, and is especially enamored with some of the notions around mirror neurons.
I can just add that Samir Zeki has come to Hopkins and has worked with us, and I think his work is certainly so pivotal in a lot of the thinking about neuroaesthetics.
Is this working? Yeah, okay. Actually, I was wondering, I know your research, Ed, is fascinating, but surprising when it came to the final preliminary conclusion, well, not even conclusion, but that rectilinear is preferred in architecture. And I was wondering how you think that might square with some of the trends that are going on these days with like Frank Gehry's curvature in his buildings and lots of other architecture. How do you think those two results or observations square?
Yeah, great point. So first of all, I haven't actually tested preference, and Anjan has, and I noticed that he got the exact opposite result. And so people...
We like Frank Gehry.
And so people were in real environments there?
No, so, yes, if this was not clear, all of our work, and most of this kind of work, is looking at images, right? It's not, and it's by no means is that the same as being in real environment. So this is looking at flat photographs typically. You try to have them high resolution and well lit and so on and so forth, but nonetheless you're looking at flat images.
Right, so that's how I'll try to weasel out of this. By saying that when you're looking at a relatively small image, it becomes an object, and we like objects to be curved. If we're actually inside an environment, if it's totally curved, it can be dizzying, because in fact, you use vision a great deal to figure out which way is up and maintain posture and balance. You take those cues away, and it gets it winds up being confusing. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of riding up the endless elevators on some subways like the Washington Metro, and I start to feel like I've lost my sense of which way is up. I think because you lose all these rectilinear cues. So I don't know. And obviously aesthetics is a lot more complicated than anything we can address with neuroscience. There's obviously room for curvature and straight.
I would also add one more point to the admittedly the artificiality of imaging experiments, for example, which, as Ed was saying, the kind of notion of where you are in space. People are lying flat when they're doing these experiments in a scanner, and they're not moving, right? Because movement is the bane of an fMRI experiment, right? So, I mean, if you wanted to say what would be the best kind of space to study in that condition, it's probably the inside of coffins, right? You're lying flat, not moving. But nonetheless, we try to do the best we can with the methods at hand.
I just want to add something about context. We're trying to pack so much information in such a short amount of time here, and I think there's a tendency, for us as humans to want to create patterns and absolutes. And I think one of the great things about this program, about what we're doing at Hopkins, what Eric is doing at Columbia, is trying to provide a space for conversation, because it isn't duality that I think is so interesting. It's really about the intersections and what you might do with some of this research in your own sort of work, or how a researcher may think about space and how they may come to an experiment. It's highly entrepreneurial, it's highly innovative, and I think it's the conversations and the connections that are so important, not so much that Ed and Anjan don't agree, because that's really the great part of science, I think. or it's yes and, right? They're all very interesting spaces that coexist with each other.
Anjan, this is for you. Have you varied the age of the subjects in your study? I'd be curious to know what children would do with this. It strikes me, for instance, in a study where children were asked to contribute ideas about classroom design, there is an insistence on round and non-hierarchical spaces. I'm just wondering if there would be some connection with age in your study.
Yeah, we have not done that, and in fact, I would suggest that while neuroaesthetics, well, empirical aesthetics in general, even though I went back to the end of the 19th century, is a relatively young field, and neuroaesthetics is a very young field. Having said that, developmental aesthetics is virtually non-existent. And so we know very little about that. Tilbe Goksen, who was mentioned in, who was the first author of the study that Julio mentioned, she's a developmental psychologist, and we've tried to look at that. There are some intriguing findings, which I'm not sure I believe, and this speaks to abstract art that you talked about. There are some experimental findings that suggest that infants actually orient more towards abstract paintings than representational paintings very early. We have not been able to replicate that, but I think this idea of what is it that infants orient to in these kinds of preferential looking tasks, it's completely wide open.
Yes.
I wanted to recommend, if you haven't done so, to look into the literature on fractal statistics, because most people think that fractals only have to do with surface ornamentation, and we stop at the fractal dimension. But in fact, you can do statistics on it that show how curved or pointed objects are, and you can actually get fractal measures off of that. And when I saw your plots, I was thinking that it was agreeing totally with the work that comes out of manipulating fractal dimensions on 3D surfaces.
That's a great point. I bet you're familiar with a paper maybe 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah, it's older, yeah.
The analysis of Zen gardens and the fractal structure. In the,
Gert van Tonder, a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
That's just what I was thinking of.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To the end here. Jill and I thought that it's impossible to summarize what we've all heard the last 2.5 days, and also thinking that many of us, and certainly in the academy, no longer do much lectures, but mainly have flipped our courses. We've been listening to lots of lecturing. And so what we thought we would do would be to just in the time, the 20 minutes we have left, basically open this up to conversation. And some of you have actually said that. You wish that this conference had allowed for more conversation while we were in this room. And I know this room doesn't really lend itself to conversation, but we thought we would try anyway. And so what we thought we'd do is just ask a series of questions, and let's see how far we get in the time. And I thought I'd just read some of them, think about them, and then let's just dive in. So what did you learn at this conference that you didn't know before? What most surprised or delighted you? What did you miss or wish you had heard and didn't hear? What was the most compelling idea or presentation and why? What questions do you still have? What would you like to see at future conferences? What will you do differently having been at this conference? And what other questions do you think we should ask? So,
Given that short, that would take about 3 or 4 more hours.
right.
So consequently, we're going to take a few of those questions, but please don't turn them into a thesis and make them short and sweet and not a biography.
Right.
And then what we'll do is we'll take a lot of questions and request that you send them to us so that we will have the questions and then circulate them as part of what we will distribute after the conference is over. So we'll continue the dialogue.
Great. So what did you learn that you didn't know before? Does anyone want to throw anything out? What was a new thing? Yes.
Please wait for, I'm sorry, please wait for the microphone so we can get this on video. Thank you.
So many things, obviously, we learned, or I learned, but I think what is very interesting is also this boundary between psychology and neuroscience. I think we have been, as architects, we go with the perception so much that to me belongs perhaps more, and just now you mentioned that is the first step, perhaps the psychological component, but the neuroscientific is really what we are here to learn. So I wish that step would be the kind of very present in relationship to the architecture.
Good. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Well, I'm thrilled that this event even exists. I mean, it's amazing, and I came directly from Brazil just to see you talk and to learn what is going on. And the speakers, the everything, like this morning, I was really like, oh my God, that's just not me that thinks like this, you know? So congratulations of what you're doing here, and I hope I can get just a little bit of this to Brazil. Thank you.
Anybody else on that one? What most surprised or delighted you? Over here.
Hi, I'm Jim. Shocked. The prison. And that, to me, rung true about what architecture and neuroscience can do. In our society, we are biological beings, and whether we're in prison or not, our environments need to attend to our biology and our humanity in a very strong way. And I think that's a key to taking this into the future, that well-being, our well-being, is of utmost importance as a humanity. And we have the power to pull these things together from neuroscience and from architecture and the built environment. It was said 90% of our time is spent inside. The other time, unless you live in the mountains, is spent in and around buildings. So 100% of our time, for most of us, is spent in the built environment. So I think as architects, we can take the nuances of what we're learning here of neuroscience and weave them into our buildings in a subtle manner, but it becomes pervasive because it's everywhere. Thank you.
Great. We have another. I was thinking we should run the prison wardens through MRI machines to see why they can get, how they sort of justify the torture that they put some people through. Yes, Jim.
Yeah, Jim Weiss. What most delighted me in all of this is that how many presentations it came down that the important aspect was not in property of things or environments themselves, but rather in ways of engaging or acting on things. And that brought me back to the essence of pure mathematics group theory, and where group theory, the essence of mathematics, is realized to be that it's understood not as in any description of a thing, but in ways of acting on things. And I find this beautiful joining between what we're doing and pure mathematics to be absolutely astounding and wonderful to me. And thank you for that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Sure. Well, how about let's go to what do you miss? What do you wish you had heard? Down here.
I'll try and yell a little.
Oh, here's the mic.
Thank you. I think it would have been very helpful to have information, maybe instead of during the snack periods and things like that, having the presentation posters, which were fantastic, but really left me feeling like I wanted more time to be able to spend with each of the poster presenters. Having more information about how to get involved outside of this biennial conference. It was great to see with Johns Hopkins the initiatives that they're taking, but learning about other things, if there are memberships that we're able to become a part of, other conferences and just networks that we're able to become a part of. I was also surprised on that same note that the WELL initiative was not discussed actually at all over the course of the conference, and I know because that's such a new initiative that I think is pretty relative and relevant to what we've been discussing this weekend. That surprised me, and I was hoping for just a little more on the involvement side and new initiatives on that side.
Yeah, good. Anybody over here? Yes.
Hi there, my name is Alvaro Alvarez. Thank you so much for everything. I graduated last year from architecture school and started working right away, and quickly learned how much power the client has in making buildings. At least I like to know, I accept all the science being presented here, but I like to know, how do we apply it? How do we make this happen? How do we get it to getting real and built? So I think that's the next step.
Okay, good. Anybody else over here? And then, okay. Go ahead.
I don't know, just a suggestion, maybe something you guys have talked about already, but maybe some tracks. There are a lot of themes that you put together for some of the panels, and I don't know the structure of this building. Maybe there's areas for breakout sessions or to kind of combine things so people have more specific interests. Maybe that's a way to get some of the peripheral presentations from the posters to get a little more playtime, I guess.
And that way also might allow more conversation.
Yeah,
it's
because
really
then there's
hard to
smaller
have-
environments.
It's smaller environment, yeah, that's a great point. Let's see, back here. Good, you've got the mic.
I'm going to backtrack just a tiny bit in jumping off what he'd said, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility to have at least a little bit of discussion how we bring the knowledge we build to policy. And like, how do we bring some of the stuff we're learning and developing to a place where we're, getting more traction, really, just with government and also into development.
Yeah, that came out a bit in the prison one, but you're right. Good point. Others? Right here? Okay.
Just to build on those last two comments, I think it would be interesting to have if I project forward several years and imagine that this really is embraced by the architecture and neuroscience communities, it would be interesting to have a discussion on the ethics of implementation and representation so that as it does gain momentum, for instance, if it did end up becoming associated with or picked up by well to the point where you were kind of getting a whole bunch of wind in your sails, so to speak, that there was some framework in place so that that people are using and representing the information properly and both its potential but also its limits. It would be interesting to have a discussion around that topic, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, go ahead.
Many of us here, myself included, are practicing architects, and it's really exciting to be a part of this conversation that has a potential to shape humanity. I feel like there's a piece of this conversation missing in making this development of this knowledge financially viable and fitting within the timelines that we work and within the fees that we receive and how to supplement those in order to help generate this knowledge. I also appreciated hearing several comments along the way about architects needing to share this knowledge within the industry. I think that's extraordinarily important.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead, Susan. We need a mic here in the front. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Well, Galen, go ahead, and then we'll get to Susan. Galen.
She gave me the mic. She saw me. Okay, I'll do 3 in 1. I loved, you asked about things we liked. I loved finding out about the little rod-shaped things and the little round things in Klimt's drawings. I thought that was an amazing effect. It was really cool, great. Things I miss, I'm surprised in our discussion of aesthetics that no one has talked about Dewey and art as experience. And the thing that I would like to see added stems from a conference that I attended 11 months ago, the first conference on sedentary behavior that was at the University of Illinois. And because we know in this group, as well as that group knew, that learning is connected to body movement, we in that group the conference people made a new little norm, which is when you clap after every presentation, you stand up at the same time. That tiny little change breaks the huge amount of sedentary behavior in which we indulge here. So I think it's a convention that maybe we could adopt next time around.
Good. Thank you. Susan, go ahead. He asked, is there a chair in sedentary behavior? Thank you.
It's an endowed chair.
Endowed chair.
I just wanted to say that I've been, to some of the questions that just came up, I've been working in a parallel field in what originally was called neuroeducation and now the science of learning. And I think there are some really good exemplars that we could use with architecture and neuroscience that relate to policy and also how you bring different communities together, how you look at how you have impact. Funding is a huge aspect of, you can imagine educators and the education system is both federal and state and local, not unlike architecture. And so, there's private schools, there's public schools, there's, competition. And so I think thinking about exemplars, public health is another really good exemplar that I think we could look at to find some lessons learned there.
Yes. Eric?
One more. Oh, God, yes.
I enjoyed what I heard a great deal, but two things struck me. One is an over-evaluation of what we know about brain science. Our understanding of brain science, and I hope you would agree with me, is at a very early stage, and these questions are extremely sophisticated. So I think the kinds of things we can answer are really relatively elementary questions. And I think that's where the most progress can be made from a neurobiological point of view. On the other hand, there was in these discussions, an undervaluation of the power of cognitive psychology. Many of the questions that came up, what is the right environment to create a prison where people can really function effectively? These are questions that don't require neuroscience as a first, second, or third step. You can get those answers by really systematic sort of psychological investigations or sociological investigations. I think that should not be undervalued, but an important contribution you can make to neuroaesthetics at every aspect. So I think I see this as an initial step before going on to neuroscience, because I think neuroscience is quite a distance from addressing these questions in a really meaningful fashion. And certainly having the cognitive psychology would make it much easier for neuroscientists to address that question.
That's great.
Hello, Marina.
Yes, go ahead.
I think it would be interesting as well to talk about our clients or the occupants of the buildings, because people who are practicing architecture, we have to guess the need. What I've found out is that often our clients are not really aware themselves of what they really need in their buildings. And it will be interesting to try to analyze what they really need depending on the situations or whatever, and how to translate it into the building and to be able to understand very well what they need and what they're expecting from us that they don't even know themselves.
Good. Thank you. I think that's all we have time for if you'd like to get home to see the moon tonight at some point. So just the diversity of the questions that we've just heard tells you so much about the many, many doors we have to open, the many things we need to explore, and how we all need to work together. This has been a great few days, and thank you very much, Tom. I thank everyone, especially our speakers, panel participants, all the attendees, and everyone who made this a very memorable event. ANFA appreciates the sponsors and donors, often emblazoned on the screen behind us, that made it possible. If I mentioned everyone that was involved, it would be akin to the movie trailers, all formatted in the same text and alignment that often takes the same amount of time as the film. Given that as a caveat, I am deeply indebted to the ANFA board, and though tempted to highlight certain individuals, I won't. What I will say is, unlike the myriad boards of which I've chaired, where I felt like a tour guide on an ego trip, this amazing group leaves their egos at the door and works and argues, addresses issues, makes suggestions, all based on our mission. Ergo, I applaud the team that reviewed the vast number of contributed papers to make this a success. I want to thank the SALC and President Blackburn for the use of this amazing space. I would be remiss if I didn't also cite our volunteers and name them to you. Teresa Dominguez, Megan Doherty, Hannah Hobbs, Nor Kassam, Monica Magdalena, Trang Nguyen, Paula Sagala, Mackenzie Sims, Youngi Situ, and Diane Zora. And we could not have done anything without the help of our executive assistant, Grace Lee. Finally, and with great pride, my infinite thanks to the ANFA past president for chairing this conference for 2 years working on it, and this is for the second time, that made this all come together and be a great success. And that person I would like to thank is Allison Whitelaw, FAIA, my hero, my inspiration, and my wife. Thank you all.
And I think we should all stand and applaud Gil for thanking him for all that you did. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great. I want to get something from you before I get your home address.
Do you have a card? Yes, I do. I brought one just...